On April 7, 1945, in Tokyo Bay, Japan, Lieutenant Saburo Sakai peered through his gun sight, observing a sight that defied all principles of air combat he had ever learned. U.S. fighter planes were wheeling overhead at 25,000 feet, more than 700 miles away from the nearest American outpost. These were single-engine machines, unlike the occasional twin-tailed Lightnings that somehow managed the improbable trek. Instead, they appeared sleeker, quicker, and ubiquitous. "This defies belief," he whispered into his oxygen mask, his exhalations fogging up in the icy confines of his Mitsubishi Zero's cabin. Over the past 3 years, Japanese strategists had repeatedly told their aviators that no single-engine U.S. fighter could penetrate the home islands. The spans were too immense, the fuel needs unattainable, the sea too expansive. Nevertheless, there they hovered. 96 gleaming silver planes featuring prominent bubble canopies, guiding a huge fleet of B-29 superfortresses straight above the core of the Japanese realm. The calculations behind Sakai's observation were scripting the closing pages of Japan's command of the skies. From Iwo Jima to Tokyo spanned 750 miles, a return journey of 500 miles across barren waters. 8 hours confined in a tight cockpit. Fuel usage that ought to have been beyond any global fighter's capability. Yet the Americans pulled it off. The North American P-51D Mustang, driven by the Packard Merlin engine and fitted with innovative drop tank systems, had now demolished Japan's final edge in defense. The mental toll on Japanese aviators would turn out to be more crippling than any battlefield loss. Their haven had been invaded. Tensions had escalated since February 19, 1945, when U.S. Marines assaulted the shores of Iwo Jima. This volcanic outpost, covering scarcely 8 square miles, lay exactly 750 statute miles south of Tokyo. To Japan's top leaders, Iwo Jima was merely one more bastion in their contracting line of defense. For U.S. tacticians, however, it represented the vital piece that would open the airspace above Japan. The fight for Iwo Jima dragged on for 36 days, claiming 6,021 American fatalities and injuring another 19,217. Almost every one of the 21 Japanese troops battled until the end. Yet while Marines continued rooting out hidden tunnels and fortifications, U.S. builders were already enlarging the 3 existing Japanese airstrips for one clear objective. By March 6, 1945, just 2 weeks following the first assaults and 10 days prior to the island's official pacification, the initial P-51 Mustangs from the 15th Fighter Group landed at Iwo Jima's South Field. The flyers stepped from their cockpits only to receive shovels and directives to excavate slit trenches. Japanese holdouts were still bursting from caverns for desperate charges. The ground crew lacked shelters or fixed buildings, surrounded merely by ash from the volcano and the perpetual reek of brimstone from Mount Suribachi. They were establishing a base amid ongoing clashes. Major James Van de Hey, leader of the 78th Fighter Squadron, scanned the barren terrain that was to become his outpost. Dark lava grit extended endlessly around him. The atmosphere reeked of sulfur and decay. Cannon fire echoed from the island's northern tip, where Marines grappled in fierce engagements. The time had come to demonstrate that U.S. fighters could do what Japanese spies considered unfeasible. Tokyo sat 750 miles to the north-northwest. Between Iwo Jima and the Japanese mainland lay only vacant Pacific expanse. Readiness for these ultra-long flights had started months before. The 7th Fighter Command, known as the Sunsetters, had drilled intensely for the task of shielding B-29 bombers on routes from Iwo Jima to Japan's core territories in return. The flight plan broke new ground in aviation history. Airmen would traverse 3 hours of open sea to approach Japan, engage for 30 to 90 minutes above fortified sites, then endure 3 more hours over the waves heading back. The full sortie would surpass 8 hours. No support vessels lined the path. No backup strips, either return to Iwo Jima or vanish into the Pacific. The plane enabling this feat was the P-51D Mustang. Widely regarded as World War II's top fighter, thanks to its smooth laminar flow wing, streamlined radiator setup, and robust Packard Merlin V1650 engine delivering 1,695 horsepower. The Mustang hit 437 mph at high levels, but velocity wasn't its prime asset in the Pacific theater. Endurance was paramount. A typical P-51D held 184 gallons of fuel inside wing compartments. It could add 85 gallons in a rear fuselage tank, although this risked unstable balance when loaded. The true innovation involved wing-mounted external jettison tanks. Pairing two 110-gallon units pushed the Mustang's operational reach beyond 850 miles. This allowed a top distance nearing 1,600 miles under prudent rationing, sufficient to get to Tokyo from the Iwima operation, called for pilots to rotate back with spare fuel for battles and crises. Drop tank innovation stood as a triumph of U.S. ingenuity. Crafted from stamped aluminum, these disposable fuel pods could be released prior to engagement, cutting down on resistance and mass. By 1945, U.S. plants were churning out tens of thousands of such tanks each month. Production cost hovered around $15 per unit. For the expense of one fighter plane, factories could equip a whole squadron with tanks sufficient for months of flying. Japan lacked any comparable setup. Their aircraft were built for brief intercept duties over limited distances. Japanese versions of drop tanks remained rare, shoddily built, and seldom deployed. Those chosen for the Iwima assignment were largely inexperienced youths with scant time in the P-51. Several had logged under 10 hours on the model prior to arriving at the rugged lava-strewn atoll. They'd master it on the fly or perish in the attempt. Among the initial arrivals on EWO was Captain Harry Krim Jr. from the 72nd Fighter Squadron. At just 23, he counted as a battle-hardened flyer already. Initially, the terrain posed greater threats than enemy troops. Hidden Japanese holdouts in the caves necessitated round-the-clock armament. Darkness brought bursts of rifle fire and explosive blasts reverberating over the barren slopes. By daylight, crews pressed on with setups for the farthest-reaching fighter sorties ever planned. The opening weeks at Iwima involved aiding ground troops on site and launching nearer raids on Chichima, 147 Mesar to the north. Such outings helped airmen adapt to sea-based routing, gasoline conservation, and the distinct rigors of island-hopping warfare. The Mustang's Packard Merlin power plant held up well, yet 8-hour hauls would strain every component. Plugs clogged quickly. Oil levels demanded vigilant oversight. Any minor glitch spelled doom amid the vast sea. Support teams toiled through 18-hour shifts in harsh environs, servicing planes on exposed runways with scant tools and provisions. Come early April 1945, 3 squadrons had established bases at Iwima. The 15th, the 21st, and eventually the 56th Fighter Group combined to launch more than 100 Mustangs for key strikes. Conditions ripened for the Pacific's toughest fighter campaigns. Tokyo lay 750 mi distant, 750 mi across barren waves, 750 mi that Imperial strategists had deemed an impenetrable shield for their core territories against U.S. pursuit planes. That delusion stood ready to crumble irreparably. On April 6, 1945, airmen gathered for the rundown on the inaugural ultra-long escort run to Tokyo. Anxiety hung thick in the command shack. Major Van Hee unrolled charts over a rough-hewn desk and declared they'd etch their mark tomorrow with a flight to the capital. Excited murmurs filled the space as crews pored over routes, tallied gas usage, and scanned meteorological reports. The path seemed simple in diagrams, deadly in practice. Head north-northwest for about 3 hours at 10,000 FT. Hold tight formations. Skimp on throttle to save fuel. Rendezvous with B-29s from the 73rd Bomb Wing roughly 20 minutes below Tokyo. Shield the heavies during their drops. Tangle with interceptors. Then return intact. The session laid bare the grim truths ahead. This meant a 1,500-mile round journey. Airmen would strap in for at least 8 hours apiece. No backup strips existed. Engine troubles would send them into the drink. Rescue efforts might follow. Yet vast expanses of water rendered pickups a long shot. Making Iwima demanded flawless fuel handling, since lives hinged on it entirely. Each drop of gas proved vital. Choices carried weight. Gauges needed ceaseless attention. Even flight smoothed the burn. Avoid sharp turns till externals were ditched. Drifting from the pack invited disaster, as ocean piloting bore no resemblance to continental runs. No visual cues for strays, only infinite blue. Tech teams labored overnight on April 6th, readying 96 P-51D Mustangs for the landmark raid. Planes underwent exhaustive checks. Motors got fine-tuned. Tank lines saw repeated verifications. The 110-gallon externals received full loads and secure fittings under each wing. Internal cells brimmed to capacity. Armament holds packed windward 80 rounds of 50 caliber rounds. Breathing gear faced full trials. No oversight could afford slip-ups, with one fault tipping the scales toward a pilot's end. April 7, 1945 broke bright and chilly over Iwima. By 0700 hours, flyers kicked off their startup checks. They bundled up in multiples, aware that altitudes would plunge to nearly 40 degrees F. Pilots donned pressurized gear for high-altitude missions, along with flight suits, Mae West flotation devices, chutes, and emergency packs. Every aviator packed survival provisions, hydration supplies, distress signals, and anti-shark measures. Prospects for making it through a ditching in the Pacific remained low, yet thorough readiness could prove the vital factor separating survival from fatality. By Aero 745, motors sputtered into operation throughout the trio of Iwo Jima's airstrips. The unique roar of the Packard Merlin engines reverberated over the rugged, lava-scarred terrain. Crews ran last-minute gauge verifications. Tanks showed maximum capacity. Oxygen systems tested clear. Communications verified without issues. Auxiliary fuel pods fastened firmly in place. Targeting optics powered up. Adjustment flaps positioned correctly. The launch was imminent. Right at 0800, the initial quartet of P-51Ds taxied along Southfield Strip and soared upward into the dawn. In under half an hour, all 96 Mustangs took to the air, organizing into elements of 4, wings of 16, and wings of 48. The fleet veered toward the north-northwest, plotting a direct path to Tokyo. The trek to the capital challenged every ounce of flyer expertise and plane performance. Sustaining close-knit groupings for 3 full hours demanded unwavering focus. Even minor shifts in power settings could drastically alter fuel usage. Aviators were compelled to hold steady elevation, velocity, and spacing without let-up. Ascending to 10,000 feet, they relied on oxygen masks while fixating on dials. Consumption rates for fuel, hydraulic levels, and engine heat all scrutinized relentlessly. No indicator escaped constant vigilance. Leading the pack was a lone B-29 Superfortress, serving as the pathfinder. Its advanced gear and seasoned crew would steer the fighters to the designated meetup. The escorts trailed behind, keeping sightlines open, depending on their readouts, and crossing fingers that their estimates held true. Beneath them, the vast Pacific sprawled without end. Azure seas extended in all directions, devoid of vessels, markers, or any features, just boundless waves spanning countless leagues. Certain flyers encountered that eerie auditory illusion, perceiving mechanical faults that weren't there. The tiniest fluctuation in propulsion noise sparked brief alarms. Was that stutter genuine or just in the mind? Had the burn rate edged up beyond expectations? Better bail out early while options remained, or push forward gambling on smooth sailing. Such doubts tormented each participant on this inaugural sortie, to one extent or another. After 2 hours aloft, crews shifted to internal wing reserves, depleting the trickiest reserves up front. The 85-gallon reserve tucked behind the seat wreaked havoc on balance when topped off. All that mass trailing the cockpit made the Mustang cumbersome, demanding steady aft force on the controls. The plane seemed lethargic, unwieldy, and exposed under that load. Flyers aimed to exhaust it fast, ensuring peak combat readiness upon arrival over Tokyo. As those reserves drained, the fighters steadily regained their signature agility, the traits that rendered them lethal in battle. Nearing the 2-hour and 45-minute mark, an initial sighting emerged on the skyline. The shores of Japan came into view forward. Fuji loomed grandly afar, its icy summit instantly recognizable from 50 miles out. Major Van D would recount glimpsing Honshu's shoreline and venerable Fuji standing proud, exactly as depicted in images, an undeniable beacon. The foe's core territory lay 750 miles from Oima. What once seemed unattainable had transpired. U.S. piston engine interceptors had penetrated the Japanese mainland. Drawing near the linkage zone southwest of Tokyo, the pilots caught sight of their protected assets. The 73rd Bomb Wing's B-29 Superfortresses were finalizing their lineup. An immense array of 103 behemoths layered from 12,000 to 18,000 feet. The spectacle was both awe-inspiring and daunting. The biggest birds in the U.S. arsenal. Every Superfort stretched beyond 99 feet in length, with 141-foot wings, capable of hauling 20,000 pounds of ordnance. United, this force could devastate urban districts wholesale. Encircling them in defense stood 96 gleaming P-51 Mustangs, their silver skins shining under the sun. Upon breaching Japan's borders, the pilots yanked the external tank jettison levers. 220 gallons of surplus fuel detached from each machine, plummeting seaward. The Mustangs shed weight instantly, gaining nimbleness, quickness, and zest. They reverted to pure hunters, no longer burdened haulers. The shift was striking. Unencumbered, the P-51D could surge to 437 miles per hour and twist through evasive turns with ferocity. Imperial interceptors were on the verge of meeting a rival beyond their prior experiences. Enemy detection outposts had picked up the advancing strike, yet their intel defied belief. A huge cluster of B-29s inbound, that was standard fare. Yet, shadowing the heavies were scores of lone radar technicians scrutinized their consoles repeatedly, suspecting some kind of glitch. Single-engine fighters from which direction? The closest U.S. carriers lay hundreds of miles distant. Though Iwakuni fell under U.S. oversight, no one believed even the Americans could dispatch fighters across such a vast span. Still, the blips on the screens were crystal clear. Alerts climbed the hierarchy, each tier dismissing them with greater doubt. At 10:45 a.m., Lieutenant Saburo Sakai got the urgent launch directive. Age 29, he ranked among Japan's premier aces, boasting more than 64 verified kills. He'd taken to the skies since 1938, battling in China, the Philippines, and across the Pacific theater. He'd endured wounds that felled lesser men, such as a gunshot to the skull that robbed him of vision in his right eye. He embodied the pinnacle of skill, seasoned judgment, and unshakable faith in his prowess and machine. Strapping into his Mitsubishi A6M5, Sakai saw no cause to question the reliability of Japanese reconnaissance. U.S. single-engine pursuits couldn't possibly strike Tokyo. The incoming threat had to involve carrier-launched Hellcats or Corsairs. Daunting foes, no doubt, yet familiar adversaries. The Zeros in which Sakai soared marked the zenith of Japan's iconic interceptor lineage. The A6M5 variant, Model 52, embodied decades of refined enhancements to the core blueprint. It bristled with twin 20mm cannons plus two 13mm machine guns. Its Nakajima Sakai engine delivered 1,030 horsepower, propelling the Zero to a peak velocity of roughly 351 km at 20,000 feet. Above all, it upheld the Zero's fabled agility. At reduced velocities, the Zero could outmaneuver nearly every Allied counterpart. Imperial pilots had drilled on leveraging this edge since 1940. Lure foes into a dogfight of turns. Capitalize on unmatched turning radius. Triumph followed inevitably. This strategy had prevailed for 3 years. Now it teetered on utter collapse. As Sakai ascended past 10,000 feet, he discerned the hostile squadron. His gaze expanded at the assault scale. More than 100 B-29s, escorted by what looked like almost 100 pursuits. Those escorts were unmistakably single-engine types. Not Hellcats, identifiable by their stout barrel-like bodies, nor Corsairs with their signature bent wings. These machines were utterly novel. Lithe aerodynamic designs featuring bubble-top canopies and seemingly 6 guns mounted in the wings. They maintained tight groupings at lofty heights, surging ahead quicker than any U.S. fighter Sakai had tangled with before, and their numbers overwhelmed. The Imperial Japanese Army Air Service and Imperial Japanese Navy Air Service mobilized every operable interceptor within the Tokyo perimeter. Around 150 Japanese aircraft surged aloft to challenge the U.S. incursion. Zeros predominated, supplemented by Kai-84 Franks, Kai-61 Tonys, N-1K Shinden, and Kai-43 Oscars. The full spectrum of Japan's fighter output. Yet by April 1945, the nation's air arms had dwindled to frail remnants of past might. Scant fuel supplies curtailed pilot preparation to bare essentials. At the outset of conflict in 1941, Navy aviators logged an average of 700 flight hours, while Army ones tallied 500. Come 1945, fresh graduates mustered just 40 to 70 hours altogether. The virtuoso airmen from Pearl Harbor in the war's dawn lay slain. Their successors scarcely qualified to handle controls, let alone wage skilled combat. Initial clashes erupted at 11:15 a.m. as U.S. and Japanese pursuits intertwined above Tokyo Bay. The ensuing chaos would haunt Japanese aviators as their darkest vision come true. The U.S. pursuits, later pinpointed by intelligence as P-51 Mustangs, exhibited traits bordering on the unreal. When Japanese flyers sought to close, the Mustangs merely surged forward with ease. The P-51's summit velocity of 437 km/h afforded an 86 pike edge over the Zero. In dogfights, such a gap spelled survival or doom. Zeros that once ruled the heavens now lagged irredeemably behind. Lieutenant Saburo Sakai launched his initial pass against a P-51 straying a bit from its group. He plunged from height, harnessing elevation for momentum. Nearing effective range, he squeezed the cannon controls. The 20mm rounds streaked wide, striking nothing. The P-51's flyer had detected the approach, executed a subtle bank, and powered up. Sakai's Zero, pushing its dive limit, failed to match pace. The Mustang effortlessly distanced itself, regaining elevation with reserves untapped. Sakai reeled in disbelief. No prior adversary had evaded him with such simplicity. Over Tokyo's expanse, this pattern echoed scores of times. Japanese aviators pressed assaults only for U.S. counterparts to retaliate with lethal plunges or bolt away to reform. The P-51's edge in velocity and thrust-to-weight ratio handed its aviators choices unavailable to Japanese mounts. The Mustang's 50-caliber machine guns, each packed with more than 300 rounds, delivered devastating firepower that didn't disappoint. Japanese aviators, hardened by clashes with Hellcats and Corsairs, noted how the Mustang's armament struck with greater precision, tighter focus, and lethal impact. U.S. strategies proved ruthlessly efficient, honed over extended months of battlefield testing. Mustang flyers received specialized instruction to neutralize the Zero's edge in agility. Avoid dogfights at sluggish speeds where the Zero thrives. Leverage unmatched velocity and thrust to dictate when battles unfold. Launch rapid, high-velocity strikes. Unleash brief salvos from ideal distances. Should the foe endure, exploit better ascent capability and pace to reset for a follow-up assault. Under no circumstances reduce velocity and attempt to circle with a Zero. This approach succeeded flawlessly. Japanese aviators strained to lure foes into twisting duels. American pilots declined to play along. Captain Felix Scott from the 46th Fighter Squadron recounted a skirmish that highlighted U.S. doctrinal dominance. Descending to 15,000 feet, he detected 3 Zeros underneath. He inverted and plunged, accelerating beyond 400 mph. Targeting the lagging Zero, he commenced shooting at 400 yards. His tracer rounds visibly hammered the adversary's port wing and power plant. Flames and smoke erupted. Rather than pursuing a turn with the pair, he harnessed his momentum for a steep pull-up to 20,000 feet. The remaining Zeros lagged behind, lacking the pace. He circled back for a subsequent dive. At that moment, it dawned on him. They possessed a warplane that commanded the entire battlefield. It determined engagement initiation, combat style, and withdrawal timing. The Japanese lacked any counter. Major James Tapp shone brightest on that debut sortie. Applying classic boom and zoom maneuvers against several Japanese planes, he secured 4 verified kills. Intelligence analysts pored over his gun camera recordings in depth afterward. The visuals revealed groundbreaking insights. Tapp would charge enemy groups at blistering speeds, usually from an elevated or rear position. He'd discharge a quick volley from prime range, usually 300 to 500 yards. Whether striking true or not, he'd instantly capitalize on his velocity edge to disengage, ascend, and realign. The Japanese machines couldn't mount a solid reply. They proved far too sluggish to pursue the Mustangs. Above the objective zone, B-29s braved intense flak, yet faced minimal interceptor threats. The P-51 Guardians had scattered Japanese squadrons before any real assault on the heavies. Whenever Japanese planes dared a bomber run, Mustang drivers plummeted to disrupt them, compelling retreats or annihilation. The protection unfolded precisely as intended. The bomb groups fulfilled their objective, unleashing hundreds of tons of firebombs across Tokyo's manufacturing zones. The aerial clash above Tokyo endured about 15 minutes of fierce action. As it concluded, the outcome underscored the shifting supremacy in Pacific airspace. U.S. airmen reported 21 Japanese planes downed, 1 likely and 5 impaired. Japanese ground defenses and interceptors downed 2 P-51s. Another aviator perished after ejecting from a plane hit by engine trouble. The trade-off was crushing, over 10 Japanese losses per U.S. fighter. Most vital, just 3 B-29s fell to hostile fire, far below the norm for raids without cover. The deeper triumph lay in morale. Japanese flyers limped home rattled and defeated. They described battling a fresh breed of U.S. fighter, swifter, stronger, and seemingly able to span 750 miles from distant fields to strike Japan. The ramifications were profound. With U.S. fighters shielding bombers clear to Tokyo, Japan's aerial shields lay shattered. No haven existed, no secure skies, no space to rebuild and instruct fresh aviators free from American dominance. The journey back to Iwo Jima challenged the airmen as harshly as the fray itself. They'd occupied their seats for more than 6 hours. Fatigue gripped them bodily and mentally. Fuel indicators displayed alarming lows. Several had under 30 minutes' worth left upon sighting Iwo Jima. The volcanic outpost, faint against the skyline, appeared the grandest vision imaginable. Gradually, the Mustangs entered the circuit. Undercarriage lowered, slats deployed, power eased, wheels kissed the uneven strip, rolled out, motors silenced. Airmen emerged on unsteady feet, having pulled off what skeptics deemed unattainable. Maintenance teams swarmed the homecomers with inquiries. What was it like? Reach Tokyo? Spot Mount Fuji? How did the Japanese planes handle? Flying non-stop for 8 hours, how's that feel? The airmen, drained beyond measure, couldn't field most queries right away, that they had etched their names into the annals of history. Their success demonstrated that U.S. pursuit planes were capable of accompanying heavy bombers straight to the heart of Japan's mainland. This breakthrough would fundamentally alter the closing stages of the conflict in the Pacific theater. Yet, in the immediate aftermath, the aviators craved nothing more than nourishment, hydration, and rest. Interrogation specialists, however, prioritized grilling the flyers for every scrap of mission intel over their well-being. Post-flight interrogations kicked off without delay. Every aviator faced thorough probing on matters like gasoline usage, plane capabilities, enemy interceptor strategies, and opposing aerial forces. Film from the gun sites got processed and scrutinized in depth. Assertions of downed foes were cross-checked via numerous eyewitness testimonies. Insights gleaned from this inaugural sortie would guide all future endeavors. The standout revelation boiled down to one thing: the concept succeeded. Extended-reach protective flights for bombers proved viable. Projections for fuel needs held true. The planes functioned exactly as engineered. Air crews managed the grueling physical and psychological toll of 8-hour flights. The offensive aerial assault on the Japanese Empire had shifted into a bolder, more lethal era. For the Empire's war strategists, April 7, 1945 signaled the collapse of their defensive aerial doctrine. The belief that lone-engine U.S. interceptors couldn't penetrate to the core territories lay in ruins. Soon after, Nipponese spies pinpointed these enigmatic newcomers as P-51 Mustangs launching from Iwo Jima. They pored over seized operational guides and quizzed aviators who'd tangled with P-51s in China and over Europe. The revelations shook them to the core. The P-51 wasn't merely one more Yankee warplane. It stood as, quite possibly, the finest pursuit machine globally, now swarming the skies above the home front in formidable numbers. Imperial engineers examined the Mustang's blueprints and flight traits with mounting dread. The Yankees had forged an interceptor blending top velocity with extended reach, potent weaponry with solid agility, cutting-edge features with dependable mechanics. The Mustang's Packard-Merlion power plant represented an engineering triumph, delivering 1695 horsepower under combat boost. By contrast, the Zero's Nakajima Sakai mill generated just 130 horsepower. That disparity yielded edges in every metric. The P-51 outpaced rivals, ascended more swiftly, plunged steeper, and dueled higher up than any active Japanese interceptor. The auxiliary tank setup especially awed the Nipponese technicians. Yankee aviators could traverse 750 miles bearing extra fuel, jettison the containers to restore peak fighting trim, engage above objectives, and retain enough onboard reserves for a secure retreat. In contrast, Japanese versions were rudimentary, frequently built from flimsy sheeting that fractured under pressure. They dribbled fuel often. They induced heavy resistance. Supplies ran perilously low. Imperial interceptor distances hinged on onboard tanks, constrained by airframe priorities favoring agility rather than endurance. Lieutenant Saburo Sakai jotted in his journal following that initial clash, "Today I witnessed the horizon, and it is America's domain. Their latest interceptor outclasses our Zero across all quantifiable aspects, save sluggish speed turns. Moreover, their combat methods deny us even that lone edge. They boast greater velocity, stronger motors, unmatched guns, sharper communications gear, and above all, boundless reach via their tank mechanism. We guard our soil with planes from half a decade past. They assail us with the pinnacle of aerial weaponry. Without a radical shift, victory in these skies eludes us." The broader ramifications stretched past single-plane prowess. With U.S. interceptors shielding the heavies, B-29 strikes would gain precision, density, and vastly amplified ruin. Earlier, the superfortresses had operated from extreme heights to evade dense flak barrages and interceptor swarms, crippling their aim. Fighter cover now permitted lower paths, sharper drops, and fulfillment of tasks at tolerable cost. Nipponese urban centers would ignite with ruthless efficiency. By mid-April 1945, the follow-on and tertiary pursuit squadrons had achieved full readiness on Iwo Jima. The 21st Fighter Group and 56th Fighter Group linked up with the 15th Fighter Group, arming 7th Air Force with more than 150 P-51s primed for action. Sorties ramped up rapidly. On April 12th, a fresh large-scale protective run hit Tokyo. April 16th brought the debut standalone Mustang foray, as 57 of them raked Kyushu's Kisarazu airfield with cannon fire. The morale blow to Imperial troops deepened per incursion. Yankee interceptors materialized unpredictably, striking without prelude from any quarter. Nipponese aviators came to hold a reluctant admiration for the Mustang and its handlers. Across battle logs and personal journals, they repeatedly highlighted the foe's rigorous maneuvers and unmatched machine superiority. The M Mustang aviators engaged in smart dogfights, according to one assessment. They avoided close-quarters turning fights where the opposition might gain the upper hand. Instead, they leveraged their faster planes to control the terms of each clash. Operating in tight-knit teams of two, they shielded one another with great efficiency. Their planes outclassed any models our side could deploy. While our aviators showed tremendous valor, sheer courage alone couldn't bridge the gap in technology. The strengths of the P-51 were amplified by broader U.S. edges that grew clearer as the offensive advanced. U.S. flyers benefited from top-tier preparation. Come 1945, fresh American pilots reached the front lines, boasting 300 to 600 hours in the air plus rigorous shooting drills. They had practiced on cutting-edge machines under seasoned mentors. They mastered strategies, group formations, radio protocols, and crisis responses inside out. In contrast, Japanese aviators that year typically logged just 40 to 70 hours overall. Plenty had never squeezed off rounds at airborne foes. Others skipped drills and fighter tactics entirely. Commanders were throwing inexperienced youths into battles against highly skilled adversaries. U.S. supply dominance shone brighter every week. Owima's bases kept growing without pause. The Navy Seabees toiled non-stop, extending landing strips, erecting concrete pads, erecting tanks for fuel, and laying the groundwork for ongoing missions. Fresh components shipped in steadily via vessels. Replacement planes arrived under their own power from Guam. Repairs proceeded with the right equipment, good illumination, and ample backups. Swapping out a P-51's motor took no more than 48 hours. Support teams sustained availability above 80% amid tough environments and intense schedules. By 1945, Japanese repair efforts had broken down completely. Replacement items were virtually gone. Planes remained idle for weeks, stalled by basic fixes. Motors gave out from subpar synthetic lubricants. Supplies of gas carried dirt and debris. Bases missed essential gear. Technicians jury-rigged fixes outdoors, frequently dodging enemy strikes. Japanese availability dropped under 40%. Out of every 3 listed planes, barely 2 were airworthy, and those airborne were often outdated types pushed beyond safe limits. Japanese aircraft fuel quality plunged by 1945. Strikes by Allied subs on oil carriers and refinery hits left what fuel remained impure or too low in octane. Flyers described choppy motors, early breakdowns, and weaker output. The premium octane required for peak engine output was nowhere to be found. Japanese interceptors thus flew below their full potential. U.S. Mustangs, however, thrived on 100-octane avgas, ferried across the Pacific by safe convoys. American aviators could crank engines to emergency boosts for ultimate push. Japanese ones nursed their power plants just to avoid total failure. As May followed April, activity from Iwo Jima ramped up without let-up. Protection runs turned every day. The Mustangs handled 3 or 4 big sorties per week as skies allowed. Every outing yielded fresh battle records, victory tallies, and proof of U.S. sky dominance. Japanese casualties piled up relentlessly. By May's close, the 3 P-51 squadrons based at Iwo Jima had tallied more than 70 enemy planes downed in aerial scraps, plus scores more hit or wrecked on the ground via low-level runs. The mental strain on Japanese aviators grew crushing. They recognized their disadvantage right from launch. Their machines fell short. Their prep was lacking. Their gas was tainted. Their upkeep was shoddy. Still, orders sent them against foe groups guarded by flocks of better fighters. The outcome was inevitable. Losses among Japanese pilots sped up. In late May 1945, a novice Japanese interceptor pilot's survival odds were counted in sorties. Scores perished on debut flights. Veterans such as Saburo Sakai endured via remarkable talent and growing wariness. Yet even they sensed defeat loomed. On May 29, 1945, the Pacific Theater saw one of its biggest sky clashes. Roughly 450 B-29 superfortresses, backed by about 100 P-51 Mustangs, hammered Yokohama in a huge daytime firebomb assault. Japanese forces launched around 150 interceptors from whatever outfits they could muster. The ensuing melee featured over 650 planes, twisting in a frenzied storm of steel, flames, and haze. Japanese aviators charged with raw bravery, launching strikes against impossible numbers. One bold Japanese flyer downed Lieutenant Rufus Moore from the 45th Squadron before getting felled himself. U.S. counterparts observed the unidentified foe's twists and turns with reluctant respect. The fighter escorts operated with seeming invulnerability until they were finally outnumbered. The operation on May 29th showcased the strengths and constraints of U.S. fighter protection. Even with almost 100 P-51s shielding the bomber formation, bold Japanese aviators succeeded in harming 175 B-29s and downing 5 U.S. pilots reported destroying 26 enemy planes, yet the Japanese showed that bravery and resolve could still cause harm despite facing overwhelming odds. Still, the loss ratio tilted decisively toward the Americans. Japan's casualties were impossible to sustain over time. U.S. losses proved tolerable. This numerical imbalance shaped the course of the aerial conflict. June 3, 1945, earned the grim nickname Black Friday among the Mustang flyers based at Iwo. That incident revealed the biggest threat to American aviators wasn't enemy aircraft, but the vast Pacific Ocean and the harsh storms raging over it. A total of 148 P-51 Mustangs took off to provide cover for a raid on Osaka. Forecasts predicted scattered clouds, nothing too severe. In truth, the conditions turned disastrous. Roughly 370 miles north of Iwo, the squadron ran into an enormous weather system stretching from the surface up to more than 23,000 feet. Attempting to push through the immense thunderheads, the group got scattered by fierce updrafts. Navigating sightless amid the chaos, multiple P-51s smashed into one another. Several more entered irreversible plunges or tumbles, slamming into the sea. A few aviators lost all sense of direction and wandered aimlessly until their tanks ran dry. That day claimed 27 Mustangs. 24 pilots perished. Not a single one fell to hostile fire. Every loss stemmed from the elements and the relentless ocean. The 56th Fighter Group, active for just 2 weeks, suffered the loss of 15 planes and 12 men in one afternoon. It ranked among the most devastating non-battle mishaps of the Pacific Campaign. Black Friday underscored the perils of ultra-long-distance flights. Japanese interceptors posed real risks, but data showed they accounted for few U.S. pilot deaths. Storms, miscalculations in navigation, equipment breakdowns, and empty fuel loads claimed many more lives. From April through August 1945, the 7th Fighter Command sacrificed around 180 P-51s in Pacific sorties. Under 30 of those stemmed directly from clashes with Japanese fighters. The majority resulted from routine hazards like bad weather, crashes, malfunctions, and forced water landings due to fuel shortages. The Pacific formed an immense deadly arena that took lives irrespective of skill in battle. The support network for these extended-range operations grew into something extraordinary. Submarines stationed along paths to Japan served as lifelines, pulling survivors from the waves. Escort destroyers cruised key zones. PBY Catalina, flying boats conducted sweeps prepared to touch down on the water and retrieve airmen. This life-saving setup worked impressively well. About 60% of pilots who ditched during these outings were pulled out alive. Lieutenant Frank Ayes from the 15th Fighter Group got saved on 2 occasions. Initially, he parachuted 430 miles from Iwo when his P-51 experienced a failure. A destroyer retrieved him. 2.5 months afterward, following a scrap with 3 Japanese fighters, he ejected once more. On that occasion, he splashed down so near a waiting sub that he skipped deploying his raft altogether. By July 1945, the nature of combat over Japan had shifted dramatically. Resistance from Japanese fighters dropped off sharply. Much of Japan's surviving fleet stayed grounded, saved for the expected Allied assault on the mainland. Commanders chose to hoard their shrinking resources for suicide strikes on invading ships instead of squandering them in futile dogfights against dominant U.S. aircraft. As a result, numerous P-51 sorties met scant or no resistance in the sky. The Mustangs turned more toward hitting surface objectives, diving on bases and factories with gunfire. In certain respects, these low-level runs felt riskier than aerial duels. Skimming close to the ground amid intense flak proved harrowing and often fatal. Japanese anti-air crews grew adept at anticipating swift targets. P-51s would roar over fields at 350 mph, their 50 caliber guns shredding stationary planes and structures. Defenses would follow their path, unleashing barrages of bursting rounds and bullets. Plenty of Mustangs limped back to Iwama bearing scars from earthbound fire. Others never made it home. Yet, for all the hazards, the ground assault effort yielded strong results. From April to August 1945, P-51s out of Iwo Jima reported wrecking or impairing more than 1,000 Japanese aircraft on the ground. Such figures likely carried some exaggeration, as wartime tallies often do, but post-war Japanese documents verify that these strikes ravaged their lingering Japanese aviation units, faced relentless devastation. Planes that endured U.S. attacks from low-flying fighters were frequently left in such ruin that they never took to the skies again. The nation's dwindling aerial forces were systematically dismantled, airfield by airfield. Throughout the summer of 1945, Japan's countermeasures against the P-51 danger adapted gradually, yet their choices remained critically constrained. Producing fighters capable of rivaling the Mustang's capabilities proved impossible. Their aviation sector, battered by prolonged strategic air raids, labored just to assemble outdated models. Training aviators to match U.S. proficiency was unfeasible due to fuel scarcity, which curtailed practice sessions to bare essentials. Replicating American supply chains was out of reach, as submarine blockades had choked off their vital deliveries. Devising sound strategies to counter a foe boasting vast technological edges was equally unattainable. By August 1945, Japan's defensive aerial network had virtually disintegrated. On August 10, 1945, the Mustangs stationed at Iwo Jima launched their final significant wartime operation. The 15th and 56th Fighter Squadrons clashed with Japanese aircraft near Tokyo, securing 7 confirmed kills. 5 days afterward, Japan capitulated. The conflict concluded. From April 7th to August 15, 1945, the Mustangs executed 51 key sorties over Japanese territory. They supported countless B-29 escort duties, performed numerous standalone fighter patrols and ground assaults, and secured total U.S. dominance in the skies above Japan. The end-of-campaign figures highlighted how aerial supremacy stemmed from cutting-edge technology, exceptional pilot preparation, and unmatched manufacturing prowess. P-51s from the 7th Fighter Command tallied 206 Japanese planes downed in aerial engagements from April through August 1945, accounting for 75% of all P-51 triumphs in the Pacific theater. The 15th Fighter Group topped the list with 101 verified successes. The 21st Fighter Group notched 71. Even the 56th Fighter Group, which joined later and endured severe setbacks on Black Friday, managed 24 confirmed takedowns. 5 U.S. flyers earned ace status while operating from Iwo Jima, among them Major James Tapp, who claimed the honor first on April 19th by destroying his 5th Japanese plane. U.S. casualties amounted to roughly 180 P-51s during the 4-month effort. Less than 30 fell to enemy fighters. The remainder resulted from non-combat incidents. The kill-loss ratio in dogfights favored America at over 7-1. Japanese interceptors were utterly outclassed by U.S. performance edges, doctrinal excellence, and sheer volume. Rare successes by Japanese aviators came at the price of bold, self-sacrificing maneuvers that exacted a heavy toll. For those Japanese pilots who lived through the war, recollections of facing P-51 Mustangs above their own soil lingered sharply. Years afterward, they grappled with the harsh truth of U.S. technological and production dominance. Notions of Japanese martial resolve triumphing over material shortfalls were thoroughly debunked. The Americans possessed superior planes, more skilled aviators, refined instruction, robust supply systems, innovative approaches, and vast quantities. No element of aerial warfare offered Japan any edge by August 1945. Saburo Sakai, a veteran who endured his wounds and extensive battles to outlast the war, contemplated the P-51 in his post-war writings. The Mustang stood as an exceptional machine. Swift, potent, with extended reach and robust armament. Its debut over Tokyo signaled to me that our cause was lost. We guarded our territory using antiquated fighters piloted by novices, relying on tainted fuel, against adversaries with boundless assets. U.S. aviators in Mustangs could cover 500 miles, engage above our urban centers, and return without issue. Our flight seldom exceeded 200 miles before fuel worries compelled a retreat. The disparity in technology proved impossible to bridge. The P-51's broader influence reached far beyond the plane. Its presence over Japan demonstrated America's boundless manufacturing might. If the U.S. could churn out an advanced fighter like the P-51 in mass quantities, innovate external fuel tanks for greater endurance, set up and sustain bases over 1,000 miles from principal supply centers, and sustain operations spanning the immense Pacific expanses, it was evident no feat lay beyond their grasp. This awareness crushed the morale of Japanese commanders as profoundly as any lost engagement. The mid-1945 contrast in aviation strength between the two nations was blunt and merciless. U.S. plants manufactured 96 318 aircraft in 1944 alone, encompassing more than 12,000 P-51 Mustangs. Japan's output that year reached about 28,000 planes across all categories. With many being outdated types or built under such lax standards, they scarcely passed as flyable. By 1945, Japanese manufacturing had crumbled beneath relentless bombing and material deficits. Whole facilities lay in ruins or were compelled to scatter into caverns and subterranean hideouts. Quality assurance in Japanese manufacturing had essentially vanished. Planes emerging from production facilities frequently featured improperly fitted components, inferior components, and faulty mechanisms. By 1945, the U.S. had developed the most advanced military aviation instruction program in history. Aspiring pilots advanced sequentially from initial flight instruction, intermediate phases, specialized maneuvers, and mission-specific preparation prior to deployment in battle groups. They gained experience across various plane models, mastered navigation by instruments, honed shooting skills at designated sites, absorbed combat strategies from seasoned mentors, and reported to their units boasting extensive logged hours in the air. In stark contrast, Japanese aviator preparation that year involved scant hours in outdated training machines, virtually no target practice owing to scarce munitions, and sparse guidance from the handful of veteran pilots still alive. Fresh Japanese flyers were basically dispatched toward certain doom with bare-bones readiness. Japan's dire fuel scarcity perfectly illustrated its crumbling manufacturing infrastructure. U.S. B-29 bombers and submersibles had methodically obliterated Japan's petroleum processing plants and merchant vessels transporting oil. By the middle of 1945, the nation retained just 8% of the aircraft fuel required for ongoing missions. Whatever supplies remained were frequently tainted with contaminants that wrecked power plants. Practice sessions in the air were routinely scrapped. Combat sorties were sharply curtailed. Planes remained idle on the ground due to fuel deficits, even as American Mustangs patrolled above with ample reserves. The morale-crushing effect on Japanese forces was profound. They owned planes yet had no fuel to operate them. They trained aviators but couldn't fuel their development. They burned with resolve to battle but wanted for the essentials. Consequently, the arrival of P-51 Mustangs above Tokyo on April 7, 1945, signified far more than the introduction of yet another adversary fighter into the fray. It embodied the peak of U.S. wartime production efforts, the potency of coalition tactics, and the inescapable result of boundless assets clashing against finite ones. Each P-51 soaring over Japanese territory bore the essence of U.S. plants operating non-stop in multiple shifts, bauxite extraction sites in Tennessee, petroleum reserves in Texas, instruction centers spanning the continental U.S., cargo vessels traversing the Pacific, the innovative expertise behind the Packard Merlin power unit, the inventive prowess that perfected auxiliary fuel pod systems, and the strategic breakthroughs that forged reliable bomber protection principles. The Mustang transcended mere combat aircraft. It encapsulated the full might of American manufacturing prowess, forged into 11 pounds of alloy and metal. Japanese aviators grasped this truth on a visceral level. Spotting Mustangs wheeling overhead Tokyo at 25,000 feet, they perceived beyond mere hostile planes. They witnessed their nation's downfall taking tangible form. They recognized that Japan had pitted itself against the planet's premier industrial force and emerged defeated. They realized the empty bluster claiming Japanese resolve would triumph over U.S. consumerism. Unyielding morale couldn't bridge an 86-ampere velocity gap. The code of Bushido couldn't rival 50-caliber autocannons unleashing 5,000 projectiles each minute. Samurai grit couldn't boost operational reach by 300 miles. The harsh truths of technology and production showed no mercy. The emotional toll on ordinary Japanese people was no less severe, despite their limited grasp of intricate engineering details. They observed U.S. fighters looping freely in the skies above. They inferred that if opposing planes could penetrate Tokyo's defenses, no corner of the country remained secure. The meticulously woven narratives extolling Japan's impregnable barriers, the infeasibility of any assault, and the indomitable chain of islands all dissolved as everyday folk gazed at American machines dominating the horizon daily, met with feeble resistance. Acknowledging the tide of loss grew unavoidable. Investigations by the United States Strategic Bombing Survey after the war validated the raw experiences of Japanese servicemen. U.S. command of the skies above Japan by the summer of 1945 stood unchallenged and final. The synergy of long-range aerial assaults, crippling production lines, underwater interdictions severing vital imports, and the Allies' crushing edge in quantity and sophistication during engagements rendered Japanese aviation powerless to disrupt U.S. initiatives. The P-51 played a pivotal part in securing this dominance. Through dependable protection for bombing raids, the Mustang facilitated ruinous strikes that hastened Japan's economic downfall. Poignantly, Japan had earlier crafted one of the era's premier fighters. The 1940 Mitsubishi Zero proved groundbreaking, blending extraordinary endurance with superb agility and sufficient armament. For a span of 18 months, the Zero ruled the Pacific theater. Its pilots downed countless Allied planes while incurring few casualties of their own. Yet Japan couldn't evolve follow-on models swiftly enough. The Zero's structure endured overextensions via numerous upgrades, but at its core, it stayed rooted in a 194. By 1945, the Zero's design had stagnated in combat effectiveness. In contrast, U.S. plane development advanced swiftly. The P-51 Mustang embodied 1944 innovations, featuring stronger power plants, improved metalworking, enhanced component coordination, and groundbreaking external fuel pod engineering. That 5-year divide between the Zero and the Mustang highlighted the shift from viable contender to outdated relic. Japan's inability to sustain tech equivalents stemmed from profound tactical and manufacturing shortcomings. The nation's economy simply didn't have the resilience. Once early stockpiles of vital resources ran dry, Japan struggled to manufacture alternatives in volume. The Zero's featherweight build, which delivered outstanding agility, depended on precise aluminum mixtures. As the conflict dragged on and resource deficits worsened, Japanese planes incorporated subpar metals, reused scraps, and wooden elements. Capabilities declined as a result. U.S. aircraft, however, benefited from boundless access to premium resources. P-51s never settled for replacement aluminum. Mustang fuel reserves stayed pure. Merlin power units avoided makeshift components. Standards held steady thanks to unbroken logistics networks. The disparity in pilot preparation mirrored these resource strains. Japanese flight instruction shone initially, with seasoned mentors, sufficient petroleum, and ample hours for full proficiency. But as veteran aviators perished in battle, instruction standards fell due to a shrinking pool of capable teachers. With oil growing rare, practice sessions shortened as frontline demands overshadowed them. As fortunes soured for Japan, preparation periods shrank further to rush reinforcements to the battle lines. This triggered a vicious cycle. Underprepared flyers met swift ends in fights, spurring urgent calls for more recruits trained in even less time, with dwindling fuel and instructors. U.S. preparation faced no comparable hurdles. America enjoyed abundant petroleum. A steady stream of battle-tested mentors cycled back for instructional roles, allowing thorough groundwork before deploying aviators to conflict zones. The P-51's presence above Tokyo carried weighty consequences for post-war strategies. Japanese commanders grasped that if U.S. interceptors could shield bombers across the archipelago without challenge, any planned assault on the mainland would unfold amid total American sky control. Ground troops wouldn't encounter aerial opposition on shorelines. Amphibious vessels would dodge harassment from Japanese planes. The Armada could maneuver free of overhead threats. This awareness helped sway Japan's choice to capitulate following the nuclear strikes on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Leaders saw prolonged resistance as futile on the battlefield. They couldn't secure their skies, shield urban centers, or counter landings in that scenario. The P-51's unchallenged supremacy formed one key element, alongside others, that nudged Japan toward embracing surrender. Over the years since World War II, experts in flight history and warfare studies have repeatedly placed the P-51 Mustang at the pinnacle of fighter designs. Its blend of speed, endurance, dependability, and combat prowess set the benchmark for rivals. The Mustang equipped global air services through the 1950s. It saw action in Korea. It handled guerrilla suppression duties into the 1980s. Certain P-51s still fly today, valued by enthusiasts and display crowds who cherish this graceful war machine's legacy. For those who piloted Mustangs from Iwo Jima to Tokyo and return, the plane carried profound personal resonance. They'd undertaken sorties that tested human and machine limits. Transoceanic hauls lasting 8 hours into foe territory demanded bravery, expertise, and utter faith in their mount. The Mustang always delivered. Its crammed Merlin units purred steadily for hours on end. Fuel delivery stayed flawless. Hydraulic setups operated without fail. Armament discharged on cue. All mechanisms performed as engineered amid extreme stresses. Such dependability stood as the supreme proof of U.S. design ingenuity and manufacturing rigor. The P-51 came engineered to perfection and excelled without hitch in pivotal moments. Japanese aviators confronting Mustangs above Tokyo held contrasting recollections. They recalled the instant awareness that their cherished Zero had become antiquated. They watched U.S. interceptors pull ahead effortlessly. They felt the frustration of total inferiority and dogfight essentials. They endured the dread as tanks neared depletion, since Japanese pursuits couldn't match the range to chase foes back to Iwo Jima. Above all, they recalled the stunned astonishment of spotting U.S. single-seat fighters over Tokyo on April. On April 7, 1945, they achieved what their own spies had deemed utterly unfeasible. The stunning technological shock inflicted on Japanese aviators that day exposed a total breakdown in their reconnaissance efforts. Military strategists in Japan never foresaw that U.S. innovators could perfect external fuel tank systems reliable enough and voluminous enough to push fighter aircraft reach to 1 in 600 miles. Nor did they conceive that U.S. manufacturing might churn out planes powered by 1,695 horsepower motors in numbers vast enough to outfit whole squadrons. They dismissed the notion that Americans could seize Iwo Jima and transform it into a key airfield within under 6 weeks. At each juncture, Tokyo's estimates of U.S. prowess fell short. The sheer might of American factories and innovations repeatedly outstripped what Japan anticipated. The ultimate tally from that extended, far-reaching operation underscored U.S. supremacy in hard figures. Between April and August 1945, P-51 units launching from Iwo Jima conducted roughly 2,800 combat flights toward the Japanese mainland. In aerial clashes, they downed 206 enemy planes and wrecked or ruined more than 600 others while they sat on runways. They shielded over 1,000 B-29 bombing runs, boasting success percentages above 95%. U.S. casualties came to about 180 planes, with under 30 lost to hostile fire. The remainder stemmed from routine mishaps amid one of the harshest combat theaters ever faced by any force. The kill-to-loss balance, operational efficiency, and goal fulfillment all showed that the 7th Air Force's Mustangs fully realized their aims. The core takeaway from the P-51 flights above Tokyo boils down to this: conflicts among industrialized nations hinge on which contender can fabricate superior gear in larger volumes. Japanese aviators displayed courage. Their plane designs showed ingenuity. Their combat strategies held up well from initial wartime encounters. Yet all proved irrelevant against a foe boasting crushing edges in tech and numbers. The Mustang embodied the outcome when cutting-edge blueprinting, masterful craftsmanship, high-caliber assembly, plentiful supplies, top-tier preparation, and solid maneuvers merged. Pilots of the Japanese Zero confronted this synergy without any viable counter. That April 7, 1945 sortie marked the onset of collapse for Japan's aerial forces. Thereafter, U.S. fighters patrolled Japanese airspace more often, met with less resistance each time. By August, control of Japan's heavens passed to America. The intense aerial assault campaign unfolded with ruinous impact, thanks to bombers guarded by fighter wings. Japanese urban centers went up in flames as U.S. heavies could strike with precision from safer, lower heights beneath protective cover. The nuclear strikes arrived via B-29s, encountering scant pushback, since P-51 Mustangs alongside Allied fighters had cleared the airspace of Japanese interceptors. Those flights' enduring influence persists in aerial warfare principles. The doctrine that heavy bombers require fighter accompaniment got irrefutably validated over Japan. The critical role of plane specs, particularly velocity and endurance, got hammered home time and again. The payoff from rigorous pilot schooling shone through in the lopsided combat stats. The imperative for robust manufacturing to support extended campaigns stood confirmed. Such insights molded the evolution of post-conflict air forces and hold true now. For Lieutenant Saburo Sakai, observing those initial P-51s wheeling over Tokyo, the sight signaled closure and enlightenment alike. His personal conflict had essentially concluded, even as he kept taking to the air until the capitulation. His country's dreams of triumph had evaporated, despite state media clinging to illusions for another 4 months. His faith in Japan's tech edge lay in ruins, supplanted by a clear-eyed view of U.S. strengths. In that instant of clarity, as he tracked those gleaming Mustangs maneuvering 750 miles from their home field, Sakai grasped that Japan had taken on the planet's premier industrial giant and absorbed a brutal truth. U.S. assets, ingenuity, output scale, instruction methods, and warrior ethos fused into a juggernaut Japan stood no chance against. The P-51s soaring above weren't mere interceptors. They heralded Japan's downfall, emblems of U.S. victory, and evidence that in contemporary battles, manufacturing muscle seals the win. The tremors from that inaugural raid echoed across Japan's armed ranks and public mindset. The inconceivable had become everyday. U.S. fighters dominating Tokyo's skies. U.S. bombers shielded by flocks of guardians. U.S. command of the air total and beyond dispute. The mental toll rivaled the material havoc. When your own territory's atmosphere falls under foe control, when unmatched interceptors prowl freely above, when daily proofs of your shortfall accumulate, despair sets in. That demise of morale. It was this, beyond any battlefield setback, that compelled Japan to capitulate. The pilots who operated those Mustangs out of Oma secured their legacy in the annals of aviation. They undertook assignments that stretched the limits of human stamina and machine performance. They clashed with and prevailed over resolute adversaries. They innovated extended-range escort tactics that transformed aerial combat for good. Their success depended on cutting-edge hardware, yet technology on its own fell short. Expertise, bravery, rigor, and resolve played just as crucial a role. Merging the United States' top fighter planes, handled by its most proficient aviators, with opponents relying on outdated machinery and frantic zeal, yielded the results captured in those figures. U.S. superiority absolute. Japanese opposition shattered.